Well, hello everyone. So I realized that this weekend is PaganCon. It's a huge convention right here in the Twin Cities. So I wanted to jump on and complete my British Isles Folk Magic EDU a little early so I could get that out to everybody and I don't have to worry about it while I'm at the convention. We also are under a blizzard warning here in the Twin Cities. I guess we're getting anywhere from 1 to 100 inches of snow tonight through Monday morning. So I thought, just in case there's internet issues, which we have had here, I wanted to make sure I got this done for everybody. So I am recovering from a cold because the weather, as you know, has been crazy everywhere. I mean, it was in the 50s and 60s, and then it dropped down to the teens. We're going into, I think, sub-zero temps again. And so everybody's got like this weird congestion thing going on. So I'm going to try not to have any sneeze attacks or cough attacks, but no promises. I'm just going to try real hard. But this is a very fun presentation. I really enjoy British folk magic. Part of my practice is it's very similar. I'm very omnistic, polytheistic. It is folk magic. It's a combination of powwow Dutch, Southern conjure, familial traditional practices. And British Isles magic really is that. It is that hodgepodgery where we're taking different nuggets and kind of combining them together, a lot like hoodoo. And so that resonates with me because I believe everything interconnects, everything correlates. I view astrology that way, using many methods of astrology. I view magic that way, using many methods of magic. When I work with deities, I believe that and I've gone through this in previous videos, and I don't want to waste too much time, but I do believe that the deities interconnect across spiritual belief systems. What one person calls Saint Michael, another may reference as Oya, or as, Kali Ma, as the Red Terra. So whether you're Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, you know, I believe these deities embrace or encompass the same energy, the same energetic output. They just have many different faces, many different names, depending on how you've been raised, where you are in the world, your family history. So that's why I really enjoy British folk magic. So let's jump into it. I'll pull up my handy dandy PowerPoint. All right, here we go. Let's make me a little bit bigger so you guys can see me. And let's find it. Where is it? Here it is. All right. So I am, recovering. My mouth and my throat are a little dry, so I'll be drinking a lot, taking breaks, getting some fluid in me. I probably shouldn't be drinking so much coffee, but it feels so good on my throat right now. Anyway, British Isles folk magic. Let's jump into you guys. Oh, let me move myself. So right here on the left, right before we start kind of breaking it down, the British Isles, I tried to find a good map to reference what is the British Isles. And so this was the best map I could find to kind of break everything down so you could visually kind of see what I'm referencing. But I will tell you, let me move me out of the way. Boy, my head's big tonight. A lot of what I'll be kind of reviewing in this presentation is magic specific to Brittany, the coast of France. It is very commonplace all over the Isles, but I really kind of focused on that particular area. So, what is British folk magic? So, British folk magic was for common people, the average working class like us, right? It was not a closed tradition. It's not a closed tradition today. It is open to anyone. It does have an emphasis on folk play or acting, performance theater in their magical practices. Um, there is no bloodline or initiations that are required. It is not Wicca. British traditional witchcraft was sort of made famous in part by Cochrane, who incorporated a lot of these practices into his own practice. Now, I did a presentation on Cochrane and the traditional rites of witchcraft, I think about a year ago. That's still on my YouTube. You'll have to scroll way back. I think it was one of the first 5 or 10, one of those first 10 videos I posted on YouTube. And it's about an hour and a half or so long, but I kind of dive deep into that. So I don't want to get into it too heavily tonight. But British traditional witchcraft is not the same as Cochrane's traditional witchcraft rites. So I just wanted to make that clear. Um, in British traditional witchcraft, boy, I'm going to be tripping over my tongue tonight. I already can tell. Um, there is a use of talismans. It's very strong in terms of talismanic magic items of power versus casting circles. So that's one big differentiator. A lot of people think of British magic as druid based. So druids were considered upper class. And, this was not an upper class practice. That was more ceremonial. Again, British folk magic was for common people, the average working class. It is sometimes confused with Asatru or Germanic, practices. It is not that. It is not a form of ceremonial magic, even though the confusion exists because there is a lot of folk play, there is a lot of theater and performance and parades in this particular region, but it's not high ceremony. So that is the differentiator. In British folk magic, there is a focus of using natural forces to create change. So kind of a focus on, earth, on nature. Let me move forward. Sorry, you guys, I knew one was coming. All right. Let's talk about that a little bit more detail. So again, this is like earth-based religions and nature spirituality, very theistic. So working with spirits, ancestors, the fae. There's lots of different ethics considerations too in this type of practice. Some of the ways you will know that somebody is part of this practice is with the sickle. And I bring the sickle up because it's very common in a home to either see a sickle over a fireplace, like right here in this photo I was able to find for you guys. It's usually right over the fireplace as a ward for that home, or it's up a chimney, right? And here I think I have was I able to find a picture? Well, no, it's just a picture of a chimney. But you'll find a sickle up a chimney for repelling, again, kind of warding, or on the steps of the chimney. So that is a way to tell if you're walking into, there are still a lot of, Airbnb is, homesteads, bars, restaurants that, the owners practice. And so you will see these sickles in these areas and you'll know British traditional magic practice, practitioners live there. So it's just very, very neat thing I wanted to point out because it is very commonplace. So part of the practice also is about leaving offerings. It's very important in this tradition to leave offerings. Offerings you do not want to use in this practice are things like iron or anything sharp. And again, there's a heavy like earth based belief system here. So like the Fae, for example. The Fae does not like iron. It doesn't like anything sharp. So you don't ever want to use that as offerings. In this type of practice, it is both active and passive. And what I mean by that is there is magical work done for external change, and there is magical work done for internal change. So that could be meditating, divinating for self. So that's kind of like the two pathways here, active and passive. Excuse me. All right. It does employ sympathetic magic. The like attracts like. I always think that of that. I always call it homeopathic magic. Because in homeopathy, you are treated with herbs and roots that are actually things that create a condition. It's to get rid of a condition. And same thing in sympathetic magic. Again, it's very talismanic. So you'll see a lot of talismans on windows. That's another way, besides the sickle over the fireplace or a sickle up the chimney or on the steps of a chimney, you will see talismans right in the windows of practitioners' homes or, again, Airbnbs, homesteads, restaurants, bars. It's very common. Christians do practice this. They are Christian, but they are also a British folk magic practitioners. They have lots of celebrations, just like the rest of, I think like the wheel of spiritual belief systems. They have the 8 traditionals, but I think that in bulk or St. Bridget's is probably their biggest one. That actually is now, by the way, a bank recognized holiday in Ireland on February 1st, if you can believe that. Isn't that amazing? Hang on. It's crazy. I can't believe I'm this sick. I never get sick. It's weird. Anyway, one of the saint days they practice, different customs on different saint days. One of the big ones for British folk magic people is Saint David's Day. I have a couple of pictures down here. Saint David's Day is huge. I actually would love to travel over there to participate in St. David's Day, but everybody dresses up. There's parades, there's performances. It's so much fun. I actually have more pictures at the end of the slideshow just to show you like how fun. I mean, I love fun, and you have to get that vibration up when you're, manipulating energy, when you're casting spells, even when you're divinating, you have to have that vibration as high as you can get it. And boy, do these people know how to get that vibration just, spanking. Like they are like all about getting that vibration. I mean, it's really amazing. You can feel it through the pictures. So again, another one of the reasons why I love British folk magic. All right. Let me move me out of the way. So, one of the terms you'll hear with British practices, folk practices, is avataring. Most people are familiar with that movie, Avatar. So, avataring in magic is where you're kind of taking on the aspect of like God, quote unquote. I don't know what other word to use, but it's very common in other practices as well. In Hinduism, law, Afro Caribbean magic, this avataring is very common and it's very present in British folk practices. It is how to be ridden by a deity, right? When we are ridden by a deity, it is attached to us. It's kind of like you've probably seen, well, maybe not, in Africa once a year in Tobago, they have the Voodoo Fest, right? And they have these huge ceremonies where the participants are ridden by deities. Same concept. Again, British folk practices are very heavy in ritual theater and drama. They have all these different adaptations of different types of plays, and these folk plays are how they invoke deity, right? That's how they avatar or how they go through the avataring process. It's kind of like the same thing when we talk about drawing down the moon in Wicca practices, right? It's pretty much the same thing. It's also the same as a tradition called mumming or mummers. A lot of people are unfamiliar with that, or they have only heard of like the Canadian mummering, right? The mummers of Canada. Say that three times fast. The mummers of Canada. That's crazy. Right here on the left, I have a couple pictures of mummers groups and parades that are common. But again, it's all the same practice. It's just given different names amongst different groups of people in different parts of the world. But in essence, when we talk about hodgepodgery or omnism, which, in omnistic systems, there is that hodgepodgery, right? It's shared customs and traditions under different rulerships or locations that are very, very similar in nature. They just go by different names and they may have small tweaks here and there, but they're pretty much the same. Same thing as the mummers, basically. That's why I wanted to bring them up. Some of the things you'll see. Oh, hang on, you guys. Bear with me tonight. I'm so sorry. Okay. Isn't this wild? Boy. Anyway, moving forward. Some of the things you'll see in their ritual activities, their folk plays, their parades, quite often horse skulls or mare's heads. Those are used to drive away death in the winter. Usually, the leader will have a white cloak on. There is the Amari Floyd processional, which is basically like a parade that is a ritual. This has been going on in the British Isles for, hundreds and hundreds of years. They oftentimes have these pun battles, right? And it's done while they're drinking. So it's like they're trying to outdrink each other and, kind of out pun each other. And again, it's part of a death and rebirth, ritual, honoring that process, asking for abundance and protection during that process. Then, of course, there's the Abbott's Bromley Corn Dance. Let me move myself here. This is a picture, actually, I found an older one of what that kind of looks like. So this is over 900 years old. Some of the antlers used till this day, still to this day, have been tested and are actually over 1,000 years old. So I'm pretty sure this is much older than what we realize. But this is held the corn dance the second Monday in September. Um, but it's a huge deal. I mean, it's a huge part of British Isles magical systems and practices that are incorporated each year. So St. Martin's Day is another one that's very similar to the corn dance. St. Martin's Day, you're going to see, the men out in their antlers, their deer heads. They have this whole like folk play that is inclusive of the hunters and the Maid Marians. Again, lots of fun. They really incorporate fun into their folk magic plays, their rituals that are like parades and processionals and games. And again, that's part of avataring. That's drawing down and embodying the deity, and the power of that deity. So I love this. I think everybody should kind of try to merge this into their practice. Graves, I don't want to, again, I did a whole thing about a year ago about the traditional rites of witchcraft and the players in that. Graves is one of them. He wrote The White Goddess, who many, believe that is to Hecate, however you want to pronounce her name. I am so sorry, you guys. Boy, I hope I'm better before Friday, right? Anyway, actually, I feel fine. It's just like this congestion I can't get rid of. Anyway, Graves actually used a lot of this, that, a lot of these practices, these kind of like ceremonial folk plays. Again, it's not high ceremony magic, but there is kind of that ceremonial feel to some of this. And he used that in his practice. So there is some overlap and correlating features there. Again, I have that video on YouTube, and you'd probably have to scroll, about a year back to get it. But I think I called it The Traditional Rites of Witchcraft. One of the big things in British Isles magic is the recognition of liminal spaces and times for working magic. What I find to be especially moving is I think it's super powerful when we're activating different liminal spaces at the same time. So, as an example, if you're on a beach standing on the shore, you're not in the water, you're not completely out of the water either, because the water is splashing up on your feet. So, you're kind of tapping into like this very unique triangulated liminal space. So, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but it is kind of a standout feature with some of the practices here in the British Isles. So I wanted to mention it. Okay, the staying. All right. So a lot of the magic, nowadays, modern day British Isles magic, especially folk magic, centers around love, health, money, alignment, community, especially protection of communities, and divination. The spirit nights are still honored. So Samhain, Beltane, May Day's Eve, and then of course Litha, which is midsummer. Those are some big ones. Quite often you're going to see some of the same rituals being done. So you'll see people with staffs, and these staffs have ribbons and acorns, and they usually walk each other's properties, and they smack like the fence or different posts on the property. It's called beating of the bounds. Then they'll also go around and they will bury eggs at boundaries to absorb energy and to invoke protection for that property. So that is very common during these spirit nights to see folk magic practitioners do. They do that, for each other's homes, their properties. There is, although it sounds like it, it's not like a fraternity or sorority. There's no kind of fraternity or sorority aspects here, even though it kind of sounds like that. They make it clear that that's not what it is. Gardner and Cochrane, again, I'm bringing them up because they borrowed so much from British Isle folk magic. Gardner borrowed like the witches' ladders. He also incorporated some Eastern mysticism, the four directions from Native American aspects. And then you had Cochrane bringing in Cornish traditions, the stag tradition. And then in British folk magic, also you see a lot of Norse, the nipping pole. This whole ritual with smacking things on people's property to do the beating of the bounds. That is kind of like the same thing as the Norse nipping pole, or Germanic stagging. So again, lots of correlations, lots of crossovers. If you do a lot of research into folk magic, sometimes you got to take a step back and say, geesh, where does one end and the other begin? But again, I think that's a good thing. I think it is a good thing to have this immersion, right? Because it makes everything we do more powerful. One thing that you'll notice also in certain parts of the British Isles, again, like Brittany, I kind of focused on that. You will see not so much these days, but they used to put horse head skulls on the boundaries of a property to serve as a curse to anyone that came onto that property and maybe stole or did something that would hurt the owners. All right, you guys, give me 1 second. I hate that I'm having to blow my nose on camera, but it is what it is. All right, so one of the interesting ceremony aspects, and again, it's not a ceremonial practice, but they have rituals that I really enjoy. I wanted to kind of break down for you. It does incorporate the use of the sting, and that is right here, some examples of it. Right here, I got a couple of pictures here of different types of stings used in different rituals. So typically, they'll get a 9-foot rope. And with that rope, they're going to walk the circle north in a clockwise manner to invoke whatever they're invoking. That rope sometimes is oiled and actually set on fire for certain rituals. So, it takes a little practice to probably, do this properly without injury. But on the east end, you are going to find a sickle and a besom, and that is to represent, or a broom, that represents the household, the home. Okay. During their ritual, they start with oaths, and they do oaths because back in the day, ratting was a big thing, right? Tattling. And if somebody breaks an oath, the reason that sickle and besom is there on the east end is their house breaks. So if somebody ratted another member out, they may find that their house catches fire or there's a flood or something horrible happens in their house, right? Because they broke their oath. What they would do is they would take a measure of yarn, usually red yarn or red thread, from the third eye all the way down to the feet for each member. They would take that thread and keep that thread because if somebody ratted on somebody in the group, they could use that thread to curse that individual. And it was kind of like an insurance policy. So this is actually still used to this day. So each member in the ritual would have that red thread that would go into a box that was kept safe by whichever member was in charge of that. And it was an insurance policy to keep their mouth shut about what they were doing and why and all of that good stuff, who the other members were. Um, the other thing with the staying, very powerful ritual item that you'll see in many British Isle magical practices, magical rituals. It has antlers. There's usually lots of feathers, black, white, and red. There's usually a buckeye on there for wealth and other items of power. Now, the leader is going to be in the center of this 9-foot rope, right? And they are there for the entire ceremony, the entire ritual, because they are going to stand there with their staying, because that is what opens to it opens and closes the circle energetically. And so that is their job, to stand there and to open and close the circle energetically with that item. Sometimes you would see an iron nail in the bottom of it to ward off any negative entities that might be attracted to the ritual. Typically, it was made from oak, ash, or rowan wood. Sometimes it had a candle in it or on it somehow, and sometimes there was a fork in it. So I mean, they come in different shapes and sizes. They're very similar, but depending on the group that is using it and what kind of ritual they're doing, there could be these small variables. So it is something though very, very common used in their rituals. All right. Other common things from British practices, folk magic practices. A lot of times, especially in these renovations, and I think I have a photo of a newspaper article here at the end. Old clothes were stuffed in walls as a form of protection and warding. Witches' bottles, were buried in the yard or in the walls of these homes. And so these homes that are being renovated, people are finding all this weird shit, old clothes, old witches' bottles. And that's a practice stemming back from the 1300s. And a lot of these old witches' bottles, they weren't pleasant. They were filled with urine, blood, hair, nails, like all these personal effects. So imagine finding, a 400-year-old bottle of urine, interesting, I guess, crazy, but tools. So tools used in British magical folk magic practices. Woodpecker duster wood, very common. Real wool, hawthorn trees, the thorns, the berries, those are fairy trees or fey trees. You're only allowed to, bring that in the home on Beltane to decorate it. If you try to bring it in the home any other time, they say the fae is going to get pissed and they're going to give you a hard time about it. Same thing with hawthorn thorns. You can pick them up off the ground and use them, but you cannot break them off the tree. Again, you're going to piss off the fae. Um, Grapevines are bad for the fae, right? So, it's important that if you do have hawthorn trees, that you make sure there's no grapevines anywhere near that or that they're managed or maintained well. The fae also hate iron or steel, so making sure there's no iron or steel near the hawthorn trees, very important. Fairy trees, hawthorn trees are very abundant all over the British Isles, and they are respected nationally. I mean, they've actually rerouted highways around these trees. That's how much, these people, even people in power, I'm so sorry, my phone's going crazy, um, believe in the Fae and they don't want to piss the Fae off. So, one of the things you may have heard is, making a cross with hawthorn thorns for a court case to win in court. Sometimes you'll know somebody practices British magic or folk magic because they will hang these little hawthorn thorn crosses in their windows to help with their dream work. They'll wear them for protection. Other things very common in this practice. Raccoon jawbones. That's very commonly used for public speaking to be able to be a good speaker to present well. Then there's what's called dragon glass or fisherman's floats. That is basically lightning sand, sand that's been hit by lightning, right? Goes by different names all over the world. I think in Japan it's called star sand or star seed. I can't remember. But it's used as a divinatory tool in this folk practice. And also for protection, if you light a candle behind it, you can use it for protection. Other things that stem from British folk magic, the wishbone. Who on Thanksgiving, I remember as a kid, we would dig out that wishbone and, you make a wish and you and one other person, whoever, breaks it with it on their end, their wish will come true type situation. A little bit of a Middle Eastern kind of incorporation here is wishing lamps, magic lamps. That also has a crossover into hoodoo. And hoodoo, we have oil lamps that we use for manifesting. So money lamps, love lamps, same thing, right? Holy stones, hag stones, peep stones, goes by many, many different names. Basically, it's a stone with a hole in it. In British folk magic, they believe you can look through it to see the honesty of a person, or you can hang it in a window to protect your home, or you can see fairies through it. So I always think of the hit Coraline, the movie Coraline. I love the fact that they had a hag stone in there to help Coraline try to get out of the other mother hell that she was stuck in. Um, One thing I will tell you in Buckland, Ohio, is the British Cornwall Witchcraft Museum. They have an amazing collection of all the stuff that I'm talking about tonight and more. So if you're ever near Buckland, Ohio, check out the British Cornwall Witchcraft Museum. They have so much there. And if you're interested in this type of folk magic or you have British ancestry, it's definitely worth a visit. There's the hawk foot that's used in British folk magic. Usually you'll see that on a silver wire. That's for protection, favor in court. In Italy, they actually have, they dip it in silver. So it's like dipped in sterling silver. I believe it's sterling silver. And it's a masculine charm. A lot of men will carry that for like their masculine protection, the masculine energetic preservation. And it also helps to perceive things. So lots of crossovers there with the hawk's foot. Horseshoes, the ends always need to be up to keep luck in. And then your four-leaf clovers, silver spoons to attract money, snake skin powder. That's used sprinkling to protect yourself counterclockwise. It's used in wisdom spells. It's used to help you slither out of trouble. So lots of uses there. And then the AFM, that's kind of a Malaysian tie-in. And again, that's used to cut off space or cut off negative things. It's for cord cuttings on bindings. So all of these are kind of traditional tools used in British folk magic. I have some pictures of some of that stuff over here on the left. All right, so we'll go through a couple of quick recap sheets here. So concepts shared by most of these systems, active magic, again, that's manifesting change to the outside world. It's very external. It's working rites, spells, rituals. Passive magic, that's manifesting change to oneself or your own consciousness. So it's very internal. It's all about alignment, harmonization, journeying, astral travel, right? Divination, knowledge. So kind of the difference there between active and passive. So, what are the folklore traditions of the Isles? So, it is not, again, just to recap, it's not Wicca, it's not Asatru, it's not Druidry, it's not ceremonial high magic. It does share some aspects, but many things are done differently. However, the nice thing is, a lot of these can be incorporated in hodgepodge, right? So, keep that in mind. Again, just kind of using as reference points, Gardner with Wicca did use some British folk magic beliefs and practices as a base to his practice. In Druidry, I can barely say that word with this cold. That's so funny. Traditions historically were practiced by these aristocrats, they're scholars of the British Isles. So that was more like high ceremony stuff. And then Asatru, that's your Norse paganism. Those are very Germanic and Scandinavian workings and tribes. They do kind of overlap because of the interactions between European tribes, but they are different in essence. They're different. So unique folk magic practices. So things to be aware of. So first of all, there's no initiations, no degrees, no hierarchy, no lineage. Ritual circles are not used as the safe space. They're not used, to create a liminal space or to contain energy. So that's not part of it. There is no great God as Father God. There is no calling in of the quarters, the elements, the watchtowers, archangels, the four directions. That is not part of the practice. And in British folk magic, very few people have altars. You're going to see talismans, right? You're going to see those sickles over the fireplace. You're going to see talismans in windows. You're not going to see altars. Other things that are different, the methods used of summoning power and using magic, again, very different because it's more like folk plays, parades, processionals, games. Um, Entities and magical helpers in this practice are very different from Wicca. It's much more earth-based, fae-based. Um, and then the way that I think protection works in this practice is a little bit different. They use very different magical defense and ritual tools. So that kind of sets them apart as well. Other similarities and differences. Again, I bring up Gardner. because he did use some British folk magic and witchcraft in Wicca. There also is some tie-ins from southeastern and central England, like the New Forest and Bricket Woods areas. So again, think hodgepodgery, right? So there are some things that were borrowed specifically from British practices, folk magic practices, spells, rituals, workings like tying knots for witches' ladders, some of their potions, some of their sympathetic magic processes were used. Dancing to raise energy, like trance dance. Ritual dramas, folk plays like The Descent of the Goddess, divination, meditation. These were all kind of borrowed from British folk magic practices when people kind of started setting up the whole Wicca thing. Um, Wiccans, obviously, they do things a little bit differently. You know, there is the initiations in the lineage, the degree systems, the hierarchies, the casting of the formal circles, the calling in of the quarters, using the Eastern mysticism and ceremonial magic aspects. And they use many, many different tools above and beyond what you're going to see in British folk magic. Again, British folk magic is heavy in talismanic and amulet use versus altars. So these are objects used to store power. Power is raised through ritual, spell, different types of works. The object can have intrinsic quality like iron. It can be used in contagion magic where you're transferring power through touch. It can be used in sympathetic magic, that like attracts like, homeopathy, and apotropic magic. Am I saying that right? I've never referred to it like that before, but that is the word technically that we're supposed to use. But that is to ward off harmful energies or beings. And again, when you're working with earth-based deity and entity and spirits, that's important to be incorporating. Apotropic, apotropic. I think that's how you say it. I don't know. All right, hang on. Let me get to the next one. So, what it is, a recap here. It's folklore handed down through generations by word of mouth and experiences. It is magic to create change within surroundings or oneself. It is witchcraft. It is the practice of using magic, generally, though, without any particular spirituality nor religion. So, it's very omnistic, very polytheistic in some sense. And at the same time, it's not, right? So, it's kind of like, again, hodgepodgery. There's that nature spirituality, that earth religion there. So it's that reverence for nature, belief in entities with lots of ethical considerations involved. It is considered low magic, right? We talk about low and high magic. I have a whole video on that on YouTube somewhere, but this is close to earth. It's experiential magic versus the use of literature or like rites in a Solomonic manual. It's performed by common people, farmers, craftspeople, homemakers. Again, common people, common magic. Very powerful. Again, sympathetic magic, it's used by nearly all magical systems these days. This term comes from, Fraser's In the Golden Bow, if you've ever read that book. It's used in spells, all sorts of workings and rituals. Again, like attracts like or like repels like. It's, heavy in symbolism, right? Items represent desired conditions. And in quantum workings, like what I do, everything that exists has a vibration and a frequency. If you can find that vibration and frequency, that is very potent stuff to use symbolically, but in a quantum energetic way to manipulate energy. So it has tangibility to it. I don't want to get into that too much here because we're talking about British folk magic, but there's more to it than just symbolism. Folk magic is going to use common objects, though, found in nature. For example, acorns to represent prosperity, wealth, abundance. Here's an example of a common tool. So this is a post-medieval iron spearhead or like a spike found in Northamptonshire. So iron spikes, in the old days, they used mining spikes, iron pins, weapons that were used, for magic, right? So after the industrialization period, railroad spikes were often used. I mean, that's still common to this day, railroad spike use. We've used that for protecting properties, nailing down protective forts and properties, but very commonly used in hoodoo and conjure traditions. Iron repels certain beings. It represents strength, and it is used to, really protect rooms, buildings, magical spaces. And it's generally done by driving these items into the ground on the perimeter of a property. You can find these pretty much in any type of occult store, or you can even find them by railroad tracks, but I do not recommend going and pulling up rail spikes. If it rusts, you're not supposed to clean it off, by the way. Just kind of an FYI, if you do find one or go and get yourself one, do not clean it. And then liminality, just kind of touching on this again. In British folk practices, liminal times and places, the betwixt and between, ending and beginning, both neither and change, it all kind of flows together. Each have their own qualities. There are very strong magical energies at these times and places. So breaking that down, liminal times, new moons, full moons, solstices, equinoxes, cross quarters, at dawn, at dusk, midday, midnight, during certain astrological or astronomic events, at different rites of passages. So liminal times are important in some folk magic spells and rituals in British Isles. Liminal places, outdoors, especially bridges, cliffs, tunnels, what they call fairy forts or tombs, graveyards, of course, crossroads, of course, stone circles. Those are kind of common in Britain. So maybe not so much here in the States. Beaches, even indoors, liminal places and spaces indoors in your home could be an attic, a basement, a chimney, windowsills, thresholds, so doorways, your hearth, your fireplace, those are all considered liminal spaces that you can use. If you can combine times and places, that's even more powerful. Like I was talking about earlier, standing on the beach at the shore, the water's washing up on your feet, but you're not in the water. Technically, it's kind of like you're standing at a crux of liminal space, right? You're kind of like dipping your toe into a couple at the same time. So if you can go to the crossroads at midnight or the beach at dawn, that's another way to combine that liminal space and time and place quality to kind of amplify your working, which is very common in British folk magic. Whoops. And here are just some more pictures I had of St. David's Day. These wonderful breads they make, their parades, some more folk magic plays, witches' bottles. Here's a news article. They were renovating this home. They found a bunch of clothes and witches' bottles in the walls. This is from the corn parade. But yeah, here's a staying here. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to show you some more visuals here of British folk magic practices and tools, some of their Saint Days practices. I just think it's a beautiful culture with a beautiful practice. It's a common person practice. I love that. Let's keep it realistic, right? Keep it down to earth is nice. We don't have to get too carried away to manifest things. I want to thank you guys for your time and for putting up with me tonight. I am not 100%. The weather is crazy. I'm trying to get better. I've been, dealing with some illness here that just doesn't want to go away, but I do appreciate you hanging out with me through this as I'm coughing and sneezing and blowing my nose all over the place. If you're not a member of our Patreon, it's never too late to join. We have free memberships. We have very, low cost memberships. $5 a month gets you wonderful EDUs like this, and other perks every month. We do have our little QR code here on the left for Patreon, our Instagram here on the right, and our main website right here in the middle over Miss Amanda there. Let me stop sharing. A kind of cool announcement I want to make is that starting within the next week or two, probably not this week, but the following week, because I'm recovering, plus I have Paganacon, we are going to be doing a weekly live podcast on our Substack. So we're not sure what day and time it's going to be, but we're going to try to make it consistent, like every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central Time. We'll be doing a live podcast. It'll be me and at least two other members from the Grave Intentions team. So Amanda, Amber, Sherry, Lisa, Maddie, Lainey, maybe even Kenzie, Brig. So, me and two more of our group here will be on Substack. We'll be talking about different cool, exciting things astrologically. We're going to be talking a lot about dreams, dream work, all kinds of interesting stuff. And we're also going to be taking questions and, doing all kinds of interactive stuff with you guys. So stay tuned for that. I'll be sending out e-newsletters. If you're not already signed up, visit our website. You can make an account, sign up for the free e-newsletter. We'll send you a notice of when those are going to be and when you can log in, how to ask questions, how to be on the podcast with us if you wanted to. So all kinds of fun stuff coming up. We're going to be rolling that out in the next week or two. But other than that, you guys stay magical and thanks for dealing with my illness trying to present tonight. Take care.